Hello everyone, and welcome to the MATLAB and Simulink Robotics Arena. In today's video, Connell and I are recording together again. How's it going, Connell?
Pretty good, man. How are you doing?
Doing well too. So today on the agenda, we're going to talk about building apps with MATLAB. And by we, I mean Connell's going to talk about it and see what he's got for us. So what's on the agenda first? All right, so the first thing is, we're going to talk about apps. So why do we need apps? Why do we use them? What are they? Just give you a little bit of motivation there. And then we're going to move into just a couple of quick notes on the workflow for building an app. More importantly, how do you go from code to something interactive and graphical? Most of this presentation will be the software demonstration in which Connell is going to build an app using our tools, and then we're going to be able to use that and check how it works. And then we'll wrap it up with some key takeaways. So the floor is yours, Connell. Let's talk about apps.
All right, thank you. So, in order to motivate this video, I'm going to share a bit of a story about some work that we were doing a few weeks ago. I had some MATLAB code that I needed to click pictures in different modes, and I needed to click single images, and I needed to click burst images. The other thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to document its functionality, and I wanted to share it with Sebastian. So I went through the process of writing this MATLAB code, and I realized that I could have built an app to make this more interactive. So once we get into the software demonstration, I am going to show you the MATLAB code that I was working with, and then show you how I made that MATLAB code more intuitive and easier to use by making a MATLAB app out of it. So let's quickly move on to the app building workflow. Now we have defined this app building workflow, and we've defined it as three sort of steps in the process. We've laid it out as the scope, setting up the code, and packaging and sharing. I'll go through these steps in the workflow a little more, and how MATLAB tools sort of map to these different steps once we get back from the software demo. So let's quickly jump into the software demo. I'm going to open up MATLAB real quick. In MATLAB, the first thing that I have open is this piece of MATLAB code that I was working with, and I've sort of broken up the code into a few sections, and we can go over the sections together. But basically, I have an initial section where because I'm trying to click images, I want to create a video object. So the first part of my code is creating the video object and previewing it. Then I'm initializing some variables, and this is something that goes into the burst mode part of this code. And you can see here I'm also creating a new folder within my current folder, which will save all these images that I've clicked. And then finally going into the actual algorithm part of this code, I have two different scenarios based on the value of the variable mode. And I can either click a single image, and we can go into this function here, which shows you that I'm simply just getting a snapshot of the video object and then writing it to the file. And then there's also the other function, which is click burst, and this one basically wraps the earlier piece of code within a while loop, and so you can click it a number of times. So anyway, this is really simple MATLAB code. It's nothing too fancy, but something that I realized that while I was working with this, every time I wanted to switch between the single image or the manual mode and the burst mode, I had to go in, manually change the value of this variable mode, and then hit run. Now, when I think about it, that's not really the most interactive, intuitive way to do it. There also could be a chance in your workflow where you may have to share some code with non-MATLAB users, and by non-MATLAB users, I mean people that are not familiar with writing code. So for them to have to go in and change these variables and hit run every now and then is probably not the easiest thing. So you can wrap this up in an app, and the cool part about MATLAB apps is that you can actually package them and share them as standalone executables, which is something we will get into in the packaging and sharing part of this demonstration.
The other thing, you mentioned sharing apps with non-MATLAB users, but I
hmm
think this is used also even if you're sharing with people that use MATLAB. For example, you've written this code, you're very familiar with it, and you've created all these parameters that you can tune, and it makes your code do different things. But for someone, even if they know MATLAB, they'll open this up and they kind of have to read through, make sure there's comments, just to figure out what it is
Yeah,
that can be changed,
exactly.
or how do we use your code. So
Yeah.
even for people that are familiar with the language,
Mhm.
it's just nicer to put this in a graphical format where you can, as a developer, can guide how people interact with your tools.
Correct. Another thing that's worth mentioning, and this is probably more relevant to student competition teams, is that usually student competition teams are usually around for a very long time, and there are teams working with a lot of legacy code and all that kind of stuff. It does make a lot of sense for you to sort of wrap pieces of code that you have that are repetitive within apps, because you can share it with future generations of your team, and they can edit these apps once they go into the future. Um, and but yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense within the student competition universe, so to say. But anyway, in order to build this app, MATLAB has a couple of different tools that you can use. I use something called App Designer, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up the App Designer interface, and you can do that by just typing in App Designer into the command window, and it pulls up this interface. Now just going through the interface, on the left hand side of the interface, you see something called the component library, and as I scroll through this, you can see these are a bunch of everyday use components in app design. So you've got things like buttons and edit fields and tables and text areas and etc. The center area, it's called the canvas, and this is where you actually build the app. So you have a design view and a code view, and we'll go into that a little bit later. Following which, you have the component browser on the right hand side, and this sort of populates the components as you add it into the canvas. And then lastly, you've got the component properties on the bottom right hand side, and that sort of defines properties like text fonts and colors and locations and things like that. It gives you an editable area for those properties. So without without wasting too much time, I'm going to go in and start building this little simple app. So as you know, we are clicking pictures, so we want something that can visualize this graphic data. So the first real component that I will add in would be the axes component. I'm just going to resize this a little bit. And then now remember, we're actually working with two different modes here. So the next component that I may want to put in would be the tab group component. And something that's really cool here is I can just quickly edit these tabs here. So I'm going to call this the manual mode, which is clicking single images. And then I'm going to rename the other one as burst mode.
And I see as you're laying this all out, then that component browser on the right is getting filled in with kind of the names of all the stuff that you're pulling in.
Correct. And we'll go through as we sort of set up the code more, but I can show you some more cool features with this component browser. And then another thing that I want to add is I want to actually add a button that triggers the image being clicked. So I'm just going to go in and quickly grab the button component and put it within the manual mode tab. And I can again double click and then rename this as let's just call it click image. So as you can see, I've set up the interface pretty quickly, and the good part of these apps is you can add components on the fly. So, for example, I'm just going to build the click single image part of it right now, and then we can see how it works, and then go ahead and add more functionality to this app. The next thing that we want to do once we sort of set up the layout is we want to go in and actually hook up the code to this, and to do that, we go into what's called the code view. And as you can see, it already comes in populated with some amount of code. And all this, what all this code is, it's nothing but all the sort of housekeeping code that holds all these graphical components together. So you can go in and see that it's got a UI figure and its components, and it's got the locations and the names for all the components that I've already added in there.
So it's basically doing all the stuff that you as a programmer don't want to do. I mean, unless you're a really big fan of, figuring out the exact pixel position of your buttons via code.
Exactly,
No one really likes to do.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong. If you want to go down that route, MATLAB does have a programmatic option for creating these apps. It's just that for someone like me, I want something that can get done quickly. I don't write a lot of code. I'm not very good at it. So I want something that takes care of all this sort of housekeeping stuff for me, where I can just go in and put in the functionality. So now let's start adding functionality to this app. Before we step into writing any code, I want to show you the left hand side of this interface again, and it's popped up two new areas. One's called the code browser, and the other one's called the app layout. So the app layout is basically just a minimized design view, and you can see what the app looks like. In the code browser, once we start populating the callbacks and the functions and the properties, you'll start see it appearing over there. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to add some properties. The code structure for code within App Designer is object oriented. So the first thing to do is let's go ahead and add some properties. Um,
Yeah, so the basic thing, like whenever you're thinking of adding, say properties or functions, anything that you want that's like configurable or tunable is what's going to be in a property. So what is it that we're going to add for this example? I know that in your code you had the ability to change kind of the camera input number,
correct,
and then
correct.
based on that you basically create a new hook to that camera.
Yeah,
So that's what we'll fill in, right?
yep. So you took the words right out of my mouth. I'm just going to go back into MATLAB for a quick second. And just looking at this code, you see that we had some variables initialized here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those, and that's all that I have to do. I just need to copy those. Let's go back into and paste them here. Another property that I'd want to initialize here is the video object. So I'm gonna initialize the video object. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a startup function. So I'm going to go into the app UI figure in the component browser and insert a callback, and let's add the startup function callback. Um, so now if you remember the code that I was working with earlier, that code was creating a directory of it was creating a session data file within my current folder. So let me just go and add in the code for that. So that's another thing I want to do as soon as my app is initialized is actually initialize the video object. And I would notice in the properties I've just sort of named a variable there. I want to actually initialize the object here. Uh, so I'm going to go back into MATLAB for a quick second, and I'm going to grab this line of code that initializes the video object and previews it. I'm just going to
Right.
paste it in there. Now, if you see, MATLAB's already started giving me hints that this is probably not the right way to name this code. So let's just see what it says. It says, oh, I need to use it as an app.vid object, which is
Right.
which makes sense because it's all object oriented. So I'm going to go and rename this as app.vid object and then app.vid object again.
Yeah,
And
so that's how you access the properties, right? So
correct, correct.
yeah.
That's exactly what I'm doing right here. Now, I have something called the video input number, which will help me if I've got multiple cameras. So, I could choose between camera number one or camera number two. So I probably want to name this as app.video object video input number again, and then add this video input number to my properties. And then I want to initialize this. So let's say I want camera number one, my computer to be initialized. I'm going to initialize this to one. Um, let's just go back to the design view again and see what we're working with now. Now in manual mode, we have this click image button. So the next logical thing would be to actually add the algorithm for the click image button. So if I go into the component browser, right click, and then add the button push function. So I'm going to go back into MATLAB and copy the code that goes in with the manual mode component of this app. So uh, then go back to the app designer interface and then paste this in here. Now again, MATLAB's prompting me to rename this to app.vid object, but I also see another sort of hint over here. And this one says that I need to specify the UI axis. So that's why I tie this image to the axes that I've set up there. So the way to do it is to add in a name value property pair, to call it parent, and then and then just add in app.ui axes,
And
which
that's
is
the axes that you dragged into your app
correct. Correct.
before. Yeah.
If you can see the app.ui axes component in
Yeah.
the component browser.
Awesome.
Um, So that's pretty much it. I think something that I missed adding earlier, and I sort of realized it right now, is I want to have the option of choosing multiple cameras. So I'm going to add in a drop down menu here, which so I can call this the camera input, and if I double click on the drop down menu, it gives me the options. I'm going to say camera input 1 or camera input 2, and then delete option 3 and 4. So now if I go back to the code, I see that this camera input dropdown has been created. So let me just go into the callback for this real quick and add a value change function callback. Now if you see what this value change function does, is it basically picks up the value from the interface and stores it in this value variable. But if you remember, we have something called the video input number property that we created earlier. So I'm just going to store this value in the video input number property. So let's do video input. And then the next thing that I want to do is now that I'm actually choosing a different camera, I'm going to have to delete the video object that's currently in use. So let's done the delete option on the app dot, and I can tab complete this. And then I also need to reinitialize a new video object which takes into account this new camera that I've chosen.
Right.
So I'm just going to go back up here and just copy out this much part of the code. Just paste it back in there. Let's run this much part of the code and see how much functionality we have on here as of now. So the minute I run this, you see that it opens up the UI and it opens up a preview. So I can view what image I'm trying to click, and then the minute I hit the click image button, it should click an image and save it here. And yeah, well, this is a nice picture of myself right there.
I'm seeing your face in like 3 different places on my screen. This is the best day of my life right now.
Well, okay. Anyway, so as you can see, it took me under 10 minutes to put this together, and I'm just going to close this preview here because I'm tired of seeing myself. But as I was saying, it took me under 10 minutes to get this started. We can go ahead and keep adding more functionality to this in similar ways. And just in the interest of time, I've already added functionality to the burst mode. So I'm just going to open that up real quick over here. And as you can see, I've just added a number of images, and these are edit fields, which do pretty much the same thing as a camera drop down. It takes in the value, and it triggers a callback. If we run this, what we can see is I have the same app, and then I've also got a number of images. So I could say put in, I want to click 5 images with a 2-second gap between each image, and then if I hit click burst, you will see me in different positions. And I'm going to try and move my head around to show that the images are different.
So you can make a whole calendar of Connell webcam pictures with this burst mode.
Yeah.
That's some ideas for the viewers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons to use MATLAB apps, so to say.
Oh yeah. Awesome. So yeah, this looks good. I mean, what I like about App Designer is, like you showed, there's a design view and a code view. So in the
Correct.
design view, it's purely, just laying out the user interface components, and figuring out what it is that you want your code to be, what parameters to expose. And then when you're ready to write the code, you hop over to the other view and then start adding all these callbacks that run based on events like button presses or, changes in parameters.
Absolutely.
So that makes perfect sense. What's
Absolutely.
next?
And then so the next part is actually something that's really cool. So if you click on the designer tab up here, you see something called, you have like a bunch of options, but among the sharing options you have the package app and the deploy app, and if you can see, what the deploy app does is it creates a standalone desktop application using MATLAB compiler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to package this app real quick, and it's a real intuitive process. Once I hit the package app button, the package app window opens up, and you can just add in a few details. There are also ways to add in documentation, adding documentation to these apps is similar to adding documentation to any MATLAB toolboxes that you have out there, and there is a lot of information on how you could do that within our product documentation. And
I
finally,
want to highlight one more thing in here, which I think
okay.
is pretty important as you're making these, bigger apps.
Mhm.
If you look on the left side, there's a file included through analysis portion. And you remember that Connell had already written a separate function called click single image. So just by analyzing what is being called from the app, MATLAB has figured out that it also needs to package up this extra function as part of it.
Correct.
So you can
Correct.
imagine if your app is built around, an entire hierarchy of MATLAB files or even Simulink models or
Yeah.
other dependencies, like everything will get packaged up into this for you to send it out to other people.
Correct. And then the next step really is I just need to click the package button, and as you can see, the package is complete. I can open the output folder, and the minute I do that, I see a myapp.mlapp install file, and basically what I can do is I can share this with Sebastian or whoever else I want to share it with. I'm going to share this with Sebastian. So okay.
All right, so now we're looking at my screen, which I have MATLAB. So Connell gave me his file. We did it through our internal network, but you can share the app installer file that was generated via email, via source control, or even on the MATLAB Central File Exchange. So you have a lot of ways to do that. So you'll see that I've got this myapp.mlapp install file, and I can double click that either from MATLAB or from outside. It'll just open up MATLAB. So if I double click this, it'll ask me if I want to install this to my apps tab in my tool strip, which I'll go for it. And when that's done, you should see that pop up saying the app has been installed. And that should pop it up in my list of entire apps. So my apps are all the kind of user-defined ones that have been made, including Connell's new app. You can see its description here. So if I open it up real quick, you'll see by default will pull in my first camera device. So you see it's looking kind of at the side from my other screen. And I can go into Connell's app and do, a click image, and there I am. So looks like things work out too. If I close the app right now, you'll see that under session data, then I have this JPEG file that was just saved. Um, and there it is in its different color space being shown. So it looks like the app worked. Now you can keep pushing out other work and having people just reinstall the app. If you double click this, it'll just ask you, it'll tell you it's already installed. Do you want to reinstall it or not? So,
Correct. I think another thing that's worth mentioning are all the apps that come inbuilt with MATLAB products. You've got a whole host of them up there. You have apps associated with a bunch of different products. You've got apps for computer vision, apps for signal processing, control systems design, and those are all very useful things. And most of them also the real good part about MATLAB apps is most of them generate MATLAB code. So you can do a lot of things interactively and then have it generate the code for you. So you don't have to
right.
write a lot of code if you want to. Um, uh, but yeah, I think that's good. I think it's time for us to move back to the presentation and just do like a quick recap on all that's happening. If you remember the app building workflow that we went through earlier, we had broken this up into three parts, and you have the scope, setting up the code, and then packaging and sharing. Let's talk about each of these steps a little further. The way MATLAB tools and MATLAB products sort of map out to these different steps is the scope for MATLAB apps is basically pretty much anything that you want to do in MATLAB and Simulink. And so as long as you've got code that you think could be repetitive, it's usually a good fit to build an app around it. And then for setting up the code, we've got three products. We'll talk a little bit more about it. And then finally, you have the ML app install file that we just showed. So in terms of scope, as I said, the sort of keys with MATLAB app building is repetition, interaction, and automation. So as long as you've got repetitive code that needs to be interactive, you can automate it by building an app around it. Finally, with setting up the code, you've got a programmatic workflow. I think a good example of this programmatic workflow is a video that I did with Zachary Lietza from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. It's up on the Robotics Arena. You can go and take a look at the app that he built using the programmatic workflow, and you can see that one's got a lot more flexibility in the way it functions, and that's because you actually there definitely is a trade-off. You have to manually sort of code every component in the app, but it gives you a lot more flexibility with what you can do with that.
So after the programmatic workflow, there are two other tools called Guide and App Designer, and you'll see Guide shown in the presentation here. So they're both similar tools in the sense that you have a user interface that lets you lay out components, and then you also have a separate way to modify the code that that is run or occurs when you click buttons or interact with the tool. So if you compare, what's shown in Guide right here with App Designer, which is then the next, so yeah, um, they both do similar functionality. Guide has been around for longer, so those of you who've been using MATLAB for a while or using an older release probably have seen Guide. App Designer, at the time that you're watching this video in 2017, is kind of the newer tool that's coming out. So generally, the way it works is, you might have been using Guide in the past, or you might already have existing legacy tools that use Guide. So that certainly still will work for some time. But if you're considering making a new app from scratch, then certainly what we've shown you today in App Designer is our recommendation. And you can always talk to us with more details as to which of these three to choose.
One sort of distinguishing point between Guide and App Designer is that App Designer has your code and design view tightly integrated together, like we saw in the interface. Whereas with Guide, you have a separate interface for laying out your graphical components, but then you basically go back to MATLAB editor when you have to write the code. So App Designer is just a more tightly integrated product. And then finally, moving on to the package and share part, there are three ways that you can do it in. One is when you actually share the MATLAB file. So what you'd go and do is you'd actually share the App Designer project file, and what that does is it allows user or people in the future that would want to edit the app the ability to do so. With packaging an app, you're sort of restricting the use of it. So your external user is only going to have access to the functionality. They're not going to be able to edit the app. And then finally, you can create a standalone application. And I pointed you to the option that you could use to create the standalone application when we were in App Designer. Finally, to wrap things up, you can use App Designer and Guide or the programmatic workflow to build custom interactive tools. And then one thing that you'd want to do is you'd want to choose either Guide or App Designer or the programmatic workflow based on your use case. So for example, if you want something that you want a highly customized app that has got some really customized graphics, you'd probably want to switch to the programmatic workflow. But if you're fine with having components that are pre-made and you all you really care about is functionality, App Designer is probably a good option for you. Finally, you can package and share this with other users, and the sort of key theme for MATLAB apps is automate repetitive interactive tasks.
All right, so thanks, Connell, for this presentation and for sharing the app with me. I will cherish it forever. Besides that, feel free to contact us via email or Facebook as usual, and check out all the other resources. We have plenty more videos available and coming up in the robotics arena. And if you're participating in a student competition, obviously check out our software offer. And find us on the Racing Lounge blog too. We're populating the robotics category. So hey, thanks, Connell, and we'll see you all soon.